Faribault Foods.
Faribault Foods. I'm Logan Ledman.
I'm Samuel Temple. We've got a very special 1855 mini episode for you today here from Batchelder Park. Not only are we telling the story of one of Faribault's most prominent businesses, but we are doing so with the help of Kelly Garlinski's 6th grade class from Shattuck-St. Mary's. We interviewed them during the last school year, so you may remember seeing some of their classmates in the Faribault Woolen Mill episode. Here they are now to start this episode.
Faribault Foods was founded by local investors in 1888.
In 1895, Faribault Foods was bought by 10 local investors.
The Faribault Canning Company was quickly becoming a powerhouse. By 1890, the fledgling business was pumping out an average of 350,000 cans of corn per season.
The help of outside investors helped the company to expand their facilities in 1903, at which point their can output rocketed to 1.5 million. Tragedy struck when the next year the factory burned to the ground. The owner struggled to get everything back in order for the next season.
In 1916, Faribault Canning Company was bought by the Duhit family.
In 1916, the factory was burnt down.
While the Faribault Canning Company was putting itself back together, thousands of miles away, a man who shared a similar entrepreneurial spirit began building what would become his own preservatives powerhouse.
In 1923, Don Resines purchased a small grocery store called La Costeña. Soon after, he began production of serrano peppers and large chilies, marketing them under the La Costeña name as well. In 1937, he began self-manufacturing his cans, a move that made the business more independent.
Meanwhile, the Faribault Canning Company had successfully regained its footing under new management until 1929, when the Great Depression ravaged businesses nationwide. In the wake of this challenge, new leadership was desperately needed. From this call to action rose a man who could guide the company through the Great Depression. A man who could lead the factories and the workers through this dark time. A man who, in short, put the can in Yes We Can. Albert Van Dever.
Albert was the son of Charles Van Dever, a food broker who had purchased partial ownership of the company back in 1917. Albert was an astute leader who successfully guided the company through the Depression, the Dust Bowl, and World War II.
And the Faribault Canning Company had quite the role to play in World War II.
During a labor shortage during World War II, Faribault Foods constructed 4 buildings to house prisoners of war. More than 200 were held there to work in the factory.
We reached out to the Faribault community for stories about Faribault Foods, and one of the responses we received was from Michael Lambert, who passed along a story from his mother.
In 1944, German prisoners of war were shipped to Faribault and began working the fields for the Faribault Canning Company. One of those fields was just over the hill from my grandparents' farm near Shieldsville. My mom, Elaine, was 13 at the time and rode her horse to the top of the hill to see the prisoners of war. She expected to see ugly monsters of men, but they were just men. She caught hell from my Grandpa Brown when she got home, as he wanted to keep her safe and as far away from the Nazis as possible.
Powerful anecdote. Thank you, Michael.
In May of 1944, the Faribault Canning Company built 4 barracks to house the prisoner packers. More than 200 German soldiers were housed in Faribault, and they were instrumental in helping the company stay afloat and make up for the labor lost when many of the male employees enlisted or were drafted into the military.
When the war was over, the program was disbanded and the Germans were sent away. The barracks were soon used to house laborers from the West Indies and were demolished in 1990.
Meanwhile, on the other end of the continent, La Costeña was busy working toward the opening of its first production plant in Mexico City in 1948. 3 years later, they purchased their first automatic production line. Soon after, another. This continuous growth led them to quickly outgrow their original facilities, moving to one 36 times larger. The space was so large they could only actively use 10% at any given time. But that excess accounted for future success.
By 1971, they found themselves in a 250,000 square foot facility in Tolpatlac, Mexico. Soon after the move, they began to form relationships with the prominent grocery chains of the country, exporting products to the U.S., even stepping into Faribault Foods' universe with a line of their own beans. This little family grocery store, while still remaining under the guidance of the family, had come a long way.
Back in Faribault, comparable success was also seen. Now under the name Faribault Foods, numerous smaller food brands were brought under their moniker, and they built more sites around town and the rest of the country.
As the 21st century rolled in, La Costeña was likewise expanding. By 2006, the company was employing an astounding number of workers who needed a place to live and a place to raise their families. That year, La Costeña built the village of Villa San Jose in order to give back to their workers and provide their employees a quality lifestyle. In 4 years, the village had a church, a library, a school, a dining hall, and a grocery store.
Oh, my goodness. Well, you know what they say when it comes to giving back to your employees, it takes a village.
The same year construction of the village began, La Costeña purchased a plant based in Tucson, Arizona. It was at this point that La Costeña took notice of a certain canned goods producer from southern Minnesota.
Faribault Foods packed beans under private labels for supermarkets chains as Kroger, Aldi. Private brands makes up the biggest chunk of canned beans market.
That year, the Arizona Canning Company had its first interaction with Faribault Foods when it purchased the Sun Vista brand of beans and sauces from them. This put both companies on each other's radars, and both would be tested by the Great Recession, which deeply affected the state of the economy around the world.
Despite the negative blows of the recession, Faribault Foods stayed strong. In 2009, the Vice President Gary Kinzeth said, "Thank goodness we're in the food business." In 2009, the Chamber of Commerce declared Faribault Foods the business of the year, mainly due to their continued growth in the face of these difficult conditions.
Faribault Foods had been owned by the same family since 1917. In 2014, they combined with La Costeña Canning Company.
The two companies' stories were different in ways, but at the core the same. Food empires built by hardworking families and dedicated workers who together were able to supply a needed product and create prosperity in their communities. Now under the same name, that prosperity has led to the construction of a new plant. Construction began in 2016. It is said that it will bring the size of the facility to over 1 million square feet. Looks like Faribault Foods isn't going to stop growing anytime soon. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Kelly Gartlinski's class. We'll see you next time on 1855.